She's located in Canada,
Yeah,
which
because
is yeah, okay.
and unfortunately, because I haven't had time to listen to the interview because I was actually looking forward to listening to this, and I had some questions of my own. But what we'll do now, we'll cut to that. I hope everybody enjoys it, and then we'll come back for a little bit of feedback and then a close. So over to yourself and Brandon.
In this segment of the show, we're going to speak to Brandon. Now, Brandon is a Fedora ambassador. He's only been made an ambassador I think about 2 weeks ago. Is this true, Brandon? Or?
Yeah, that's true.
And the reason we invited Brandon on the show is to release the quite imminent release of Fedora 14. We hope to release this show on a Monday, with one day before the actual release, and we're here to ask a few questions to try and learn about the Fedora project in general.
Okay.
I think I personally used Red Hat. That was the first distribution I used in the year 2000. I'm not sure which number it was, but I actually remember using a bit of KDE first. And since then we had I think about 5 years or 4 years before we had Fedora coming along as a project. Can you just explain to us in general what the Fedora project is trying to achieve, what it's about?
Okay, well, Fedora project runs off of 4 foundations, a set of core values that they try to maintain, and I'll just read them off. Freedom. Freedom represents dedication to free software and content. They believe that the way to push advancing software is through content freedom and through free software. Friends represents the strength of the community. Features represents their commitment to excellence. They're always building out new features, and stuff like Pulse Audio and Network Manager are just examples of this. And first is their commitment to innovation. They like to have stuff out first before anyone else does, and I believe it shows in the versions of stuff that releases with the distribution, that they always have the latest.
Yeah, it's supposed to have version 14 is supposed to be quite an exciting release, and I can probably try and guess that based on the fact that the website is being redone to a great extent. I've been to the website a few years ago, and quite recently, and it was more of a wiki-structured thing. It was a bit kind of intimidating, I think, to new users, and more recently I think they employed some people to try and redo the website and refactor the website to make it more user-friendly. Have you had a chance to look at the website, and can you explain to us what the changes might be to a person who hasn't been on the site for a few years?
Well, I think the new website is awesome, and Marin Duffy did a great job on it. The old website did look kind of scary because it did look like a beefed up wiki, but the new site it's just a lot more user friendly, and you can get to all of the things that you're looking for very easily.
Which I'm just wondering about the distribution itself. I mean, obviously the website tries to convince people to download the distribution of Fedora. I think lots of people, they come to GNU/Linux and they just kind of assume they want to download Ubuntu or maybe even something like in the past Mandriva as a desktop distribution, and they think of Fedora as kind of like the Red Hat server-side enthusiast desktop. And I think the website is supposed to convince people to get Fedora 14, or will convince to people to download the version 14 when it's out on Tuesday. But what is it that's for a desktop user to find Fedora 14? Is it actually changed in the sense that it got more welcoming, say, to a user who's expecting it to be, as they say, as easy as Ubuntu? Is it actually as easy as Ubuntu or any of the other distributions too?
Honestly, I would say it is just as easy as Ubuntu because they both include the same software. Just Ubuntu adds a little bit of polish to their GNOME desktop, and Fedora is usually closer to the upstream GNOME desktop. And both of them are getting closer day by day as GNOME borrows a lot of the ideas that Canonical comes up with. I don't think that too much longer there will be much difference other than the shells that they're going to be forking.
I think there was a bit of a dispute recently. Actually, there is the recent dispute, and there is one which goes to around the month of August or September. There was quite a bit of a noise about the fact that Ubuntu wasn't contributing upstream to GNOME as much as Fedora, and I think Fedora is a tradition of actually giving lots in terms of code, but not as much necessarily in terms of gaining or to absorbing new user base from the other sides. Actually trying to pull people from Mac OS X and from Windows and other platforms. But I think that the more recent controversy was to do with the Unity interface, which Canonical tries to introduce, and I think will put by default in Ubuntu 11.04. Have you been keeping track of that dispute by any chance?
Just a little bit. I do know that I was reading on Planet Fedora, one of the contributors had mentioned a comparison between the amount of code contributed by both projects, Unity and GNOME Shell, and it pointed out that GNOME Shell was contributed a lot by Red Hat, and Unity was contributed a lot by Canonical, and he pointed out, is there a conspiracy here?
I suppose quite a few people spoke about fragmentation as a potential point of conflict, and I think it's interesting. I personally, speaking for myself, I find it striking that people have this division between, KDE and GNOME and all these other desktop environments, and once you have this division within the desktop environment itself, people tend to describe this as a very negative thing.
Yeah.
So, and one of I also find it a bit ironic that something that's called Unity is actually causing so much in terms of division between people, so much fighting between people.
It's a pretty huge coincidence. At least
I mean, and based on what I saw, it might be exposed to certain specific people, but when I look at Identica, I see quite a few of the Red Hat staff quite angry, even I'd say, at Canonical for what they do with Unity. I've seen all sorts of responses, and I've seen all sorts of attempts to try and almost aggravate the community, and I've also actually tried to convince Canonical to stay with the default GNOME environment, basically. And I also saw some Novell employees doing the same, at least one I can think of. The reason I actually tried to move in this direction in the conversation is because I think one thing I can say, not as a Fedora user, but at least as a person who's been using some kind of Red Hat based or RPM based distributions for at least for over 10 years now, there is a bit of an underestimation of of the amount of work Red Hat has done on the desktop itself. And lots of people tend to appreciate Linux for the things they see in other distributions. And I know that Fedora, although it's a project that's only about 5 years old, in many ways that's kind of the genesis of Linux, because the company behind Fedora, or at least the company which sponsors a lot of the development of Fedora and the desktop, is one of the first companies to put Linux commercially out there in the market, at least in the sense that we see today as a public company. And this is why I think people don't quite appreciate the fact that, and again, speaking for myself, we need to support the Fedora project as a desktop, side of GNU/Linux in order for the company which puts lots of money into it to continue to develop the underlying things at the level of not just the GUI, but things even underneath the GUI. Things like you mentioned Pulse Audio before. And we need to try and ensure that somebody is working on these things. And one of the things that may justify the efforts from Red Hat and people that I happen to know from the company who are developing things, we have to ensure people actually use Fedora. I think there is you know, as release 14 approaches, I sometimes get these people who say things like, stop advertising Ubuntu and try to give more exposure to Fedora, because I think even the press tends to treat